Hey, Joel, thank you for joining. Very excited to have you here with us today.
Great to be with you, Ronak.
And of course, hello to everyone in the audience and welcome to our latest Fireside Chat. As you may know, I'm Ronak Shet, CEO and founder of Lit Videobooks. Our mission is to make reading and learning from best-selling business books as enjoyable and entertaining as watching a movie or documentary. And if you want more info about us, just stay tuned at the end of the chat. Right now, we are going to focus on what I know is going to be a really exciting conversation with Joel Peterson on cracking the leadership code. So we're going to save the last 15 minutes or so for Q&A. And there's a Slido link that was just put in the chat. You can pre-ask your questions there and upvote anything you find interesting so we know what to call out during that session. Joel, I'm going to share your bio here with the audience before we get started. Joel, you're a seasoned executive, entrepreneur, and educator with a wealth of experience in leadership and business management. You've served as the chairman of JetBlue Airways, where you helped guide the company through significant growth and strategic transformation. With over 35 years of experience in private equity, you're also the founding partner of Peterson Partners, a leading investment firm that has backed over 200 companies across various industries. You're also a longstanding faculty member at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where you've been teaching courses on real estate investment, entrepreneurship, and leadership. And we know you're also working, I'm sure I've missed a ton, but I'm sure I know you're also working on a new book that's coming out hopefully soon. Could you tell us a little bit about the upcoming book?
Well, all that means is I'm very old. But yeah, the book I'm working on, I'm calling Juggling Glass and Rubber Balls. That doesn't sound like it might be interesting to your audience, but it has to do with how do you find work-life balance? And it's really for executives that have a lot of pressure on them and are also trying to raise a family. So that's the idea, and it's called One Dad's Approach to Raising Great Kids.
I mean, I do really love the concept. I was able to pre-read a little bit of it. And I love the concept of, glass and rubber balls. And I guess like once you figure out which ones are glass and which ones are rubber, kind of between your family and work, you can really kind of start to lead a more intentional life. And so, we have a few more questions for you on the new book that I'll circle back to later on in the conversation. But speaking of leadership, let's dive into entrepreneurial leadership. So you distill all of your experiences into actionable advice for leaders at companies of all sizes. And your book and video book are often used as part of leadership development programs. What was the moment that inspired you to write this book? What made you say other people need to read this?
Well, there were really kind of two things. One was just all these years of experience. I sort of started in the top at the top in my career and worked my way down. But it turned out that I had lots of experience with either being chief financial officer or CEO or board chair or lead director or whatever. And I got to observe hundreds and hundreds of C-suites and teams, executive teams. And so I kind of found in my life, I was collecting all of these experiences that could be helpful. There was then a triggering event when my wife was preparing for a big family hike we were going to do together, and she slipped off to climb a mountain, and she ended up not taking a down jacket, not taking a phone, not going with a companion, just violating all the rules, and she ended up spending the night on the mountain. And I thought, my gosh, this is a smart woman who knows all the rules, and yet she violated all of them. And then I thought about superimposing that experience on the experiences I'd had in nurturing, coaching entrepreneurs and leading companies, and realizing that most of the difficult situations were ones in which management teams had violated the fundamental rules of execution. And so I thought, I'm actually going to write them all down. It's almost like a checklist. Pilots have checklists. They've flown, they could probably fly without going through the checklist, but they sit there and they go through the checklist every single time before they take off. And I kind of felt like, managers, leaders, entrepreneurs need checklists. So that was the idea.
I really love your approach. The advice is really practical and something I can apply even at Lit Videobooks. It really takes knowing yourself and having a lot of courage, but it's very practical advice. And your anecdotes are really exciting and compelling. And I want to kind of introduce the audience to the video book and share a quick clip introducing the 4 things you say entrepreneurial leaders need to do to be successful. Let's go ahead and play the opening of the video book.
In his video book, Entrepreneurial Leadership, Peterson uses his extensive experience to make a map for his fellow travelers.
There are 4 things that entrepreneurs need to do. The first is they need to build trust as the currency of their enterprise. They must be trustworthy. The second thing they must do is have clarity around the goal. The third thing they have to do is bring on the right team. And then finally, they have to execute.
Joel, I bet
It all sounds so
it's
simple,
fun
doesn't
it? Very easy. I bet it was fun to rewatch yourself in the video book. So
Not so
could you
much.
dive could you dive a little deeper into each of the core tenets of entrepreneurial leadership? I'm curious about your approach and how it is divergent from traditional leadership advice.
Well, the first element is building trust, and trust is built a conversation at a time. It's built the delivery of a promise at a time. And the reason you trust somebody is not because you like them or that they're fuzzy, feel-good feelings whenever you talk to them, but it's really because they make and keep promises. And so trust then is something that's built up slowly, but it is the currency for well-run organizations. And so I think the great leaders that I've worked with have actually been highly trustworthy. They've had incredible EQ, and they build these relationships that the organizations thrive on. So that's the first thing, and that's kind of the underpinning. It's sort of table stakes for building a great organization. The second thing is clarity around the mission. What is winning is the question I ask all of the leaders that I work with. Define winning and describe it in a way that's simple to understand. Sometimes winning can be losing less money this quarter than we lost last quarter. So winning isn't always this high-minded thing, but it's really helpful to have a very clear long-term goal. What are you striving for? What is the mission of the enterprise? The third one is to actually build a great team. And that means sourcing, interviewing, recruiting, onboarding, training, giving feedback, promoting, demoting, and ultimately letting people go. Because your job as a leader is to have the best team on the field at all times. And then finally, it's execution. And execution, I visited with a number of entrepreneurial leaders around the most important execution steps. And they all said things like selling, negotiating, running meetings, turning things around, managing growth, managing a board. So there were a number of things where you really having a checklist really helps, but none of the first 3 matters if you don't execute. So those are the 4 steps. And I think great maps are simple. And so what I wanted to do is make it simple, even though it's what you're doing is very complex and involved. The idea of having a simple map is really powerful. So that's what I was trying to do.
I completely agree, and it's been really helpful leveraging a lot of these tenets at my own company. And Joel, I guess, how do you recommend leaders balance, big picture thinking with day-to-day operational demands? What are some pitfalls that leaders should avoid?
Well, that's a great question and a really important thing. And every leader I know struggles with that. And a lot of times people ask, what's more important, the big picture being a visionary or execution? And I always feel like it's a little like the question, what's more important, air or food or water? You're going to die without all of them. So you have to figure out how to balance all of them. And I think it starts with having a vision, clarity around what it is you're trying to achieve, and having everybody in the organization agree on that. Then you can get into execution steps. So I've always I've had this chart that I've worked off of my whole business career, which aligns your values with your objectives, with your strategy, with your tactics, and your controls. So if you align those things and measure against those, you can actually balance all of them. And I call it finding harmony. I think that's the way to think about managing pretty much everything in life, is finding harmony in a very chaotic world, in a world that's changing all the time and with a lot of competition and stress, seeking harmony. And so I think you have to do all of them. But I would start with clarity around what winning is, clarity around values, and then what winning is.
That's really interesting.
One other thing there, Ronak. I think that nobody does all of the execution things well. I described several different kinds of leaders in the book, and nobody is all of them. And so what they have to do is assemble a team around them that achieves all of those things. So if you're not good at execution, make sure you've got great operators. If you're not good at envisioning or strategizing or reading the market, whatever, make sure that you've got good strategists. And so you can do one or two of them really well at a world-class level, but just make sure you cover the other bases.
So it definitely sounds like introspection is a very important trait of leaders, to be able to identify their strengths and weaknesses and be very forthcoming about them so that they can have the best team.
Yeah, one of the things I encourage my students to do is a personal balance sheet, to figure out what are their assets and what are their liabilities. And then to figure out, are they better off building on their assets or limiting their liabilities, reducing their liabilities? But I think you have to think about, where do your assets come from and your liabilities? And they come from either DNA or nurture or decision-making. And so all of us we've all inherited DNA that we had really nothing to do with. We were nurtured, whether it's by peers or parents or friends or teachers or whatever. And then we can be agents and change the trajectory of our lives. And one of the ways I did that was with mantras. I looked at my liabilities and said, oh my gosh, I've got to do something about those. And so I came up with 3 mantras that actually changed the direction of my life. And so I would encourage everybody, any leader, to really be thoughtful about their assets and liabilities, and think particularly about the liabilities. What do you need to change? And then come up with a mantra that, for me, it took 10 years of reminding myself the same things to change. And finally, I made improvement.
Joel, would you be open to sharing one of the mantras?
Sure, I'll share all 3 of them with you, Ronak, if you don't mind. But my first one, because I was egocentric, was, it's not about me. And so I had to say that to myself a lot of times when I'd feel offended or whatever, or feel like, I was at the center of the universe. I would just say, it's not about me. The second was, I'm not my emotions. Most of us are emotional and respond emotionally to issues. And I just kept reminding myself, I'm not my emotions. And the third one was, I have everything I need. So I could stop blaming others. When things didn't go right, I had a tendency to blame others. So just reminding myself, I have everything I need. Those 3 statements, and I probably said them to myself several times a day, if not an hour, depending on what was going on in my life. They really did help me readjust where I was headed as a leader.
Those are wonderful mantras. I'm going to have to think about how I can incorporate some of those into my own life.
Or develop your own,
Joel,
around where your weaknesses are.
Absolutely. I'm going to make that balance sheet.
Yep.
So you talk about the importance of personal development in this journey as well, and relate it back to legendary baseball player Willie Mays. We're going to go ahead and pull up a clip from the video book that talks about this.
Anybody who's watched Baseball Scouts know they're always on the prowl for the 5-tool player. And this, to them, means somebody who can run, throw, field, hit for average, and hit for power. And just think Willie Mays, is a great baseball player who is a great 5-tool baseball player. Well, these 5 styles of leadership have to be captured within an organization for it to grow to a durable enterprise that succeeds.
Let's look at the 5 leadership styles we'll see on the field, starting with presiders. who ensure things run smoothly while avoiding dramatic change.
They often speak from the corner office. They speak in policy terms. They kiss babies. They cut ribbons. I don't mean to be dismissive of the role because it's important. It's a cultural repository. So managers typically deliver product or services. They may be somebody who runs a factory, somebody who runs a service, but they know how to get product or service out the door. Administrators typically are people who understand rules and regulations. They understand the law, they interpret things, they keep you within the guardrails of your industry or enterprise.
Next, we move on to the pure entrepreneur.
This is what people think of when they think of the entrepreneur. They think of kind of the wild-eyed innovator, the inventor, the visionary. And so a lot of entrepreneurs stop there. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the entrepreneurial leader that can build a durable enterprise. Politicians typically understand how to compromise. They understand power. They understand how to make trades. And within a large organization, there are a lot of political things that need to be done. So when I take all these 5 forms of leadership, I don't dismiss any of them. I think they all play a valuable role. And so the entrepreneurial leader has to either bring those tools or hire those tools and manage those tools. It's not enough just to be an innovator. It's not enough just to be a presider or a politician or a manager. They have to all be present for an enterprise to be successful.
Super insightful, Joel. And I think in leadership development practices, and you sort of alluded to this with the personal balance sheet. There are frameworks that focus on improving weaknesses to become more successful, and then there are other frameworks that discuss focusing on kind of just your strengths. Where would you fall on that spectrum? And what advice do you have for the audience who see their leadership strengths on some of the bases and then weaknesses on others?
So that's a struggle everyone has too, because we all have strengths and weaknesses. I'll tell you a quick story. I was made chief financial officer before I was 30 years old. And I was not a CPA, but I had 92 CPAs reporting to me. And so I took nighttime CPA courses and I hated them and I wasn't any good at it. And yet I had this job that I felt like I had to build on that weakness in order to be effective. I met with Peter Drucker, who is a management guru out at Claremont College in California. And I asked him that question. I said, how do you think about the very question you just asked me? And he said in a simple phrase, he said, build on your strengths, make your weaknesses irrelevant. And that was pretty good advice for me because there were certain things that, and everybody has superpowers, certain things that they're really good at. Drucker's advice was build on those and then make irrelevant your weaknesses. That doesn't mean ignore them. That means cover them. Make sure that you're at least adequate and that you've hired people around you that cover those weaknesses. So that's the approach I took.
That's great. I completely agree. And I guess just taking this from kind of a more micro level to a macro level, what are some qualities you seek out in emerging leaders or entrepreneurs? And how can some of the professionals and kind of leaders within the audience nurture and incorporate some of these qualities into their leadership development programs?
Well, I think everything is driven by values, and values aren't things like integrity or whatever. Those are virtues, and they relate to values. But your values are where you spend your time, your money, and your mind share. And so I think it starts with a leader figuring out what truly are my values. When I did this, I discovered that I didn't really like all the things that I was spending time, money, and mind share on. A lot of them were pretty irrelevant to what I really wanted. So I think figuring that out is a starting point. And then I think you have to really become trustworthy. I wrote another book called The 10 Laws of Trust, which is really the idea of how do you go about systematically becoming trustworthy, building trust up within an organization. So because it is such an essential element, such an important currency for the leader, I think really becoming trustworthy. You have brand attributes. Anybody in the audience could ask friends and family what their brand attributes are, and then we'd start to hear things being repeated. So I think one of the things you want to strive for as a brand attribute, if you're going to be a leader, is that you are trustworthy. Then I think you have to, you really have to be a clear communicator. I talk about mission, but the mission has to be communicated. And for missions to be effective, they have to be communicated in very simple terms. It was Oliver Wendell Holmes that said, I would not give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity the other side of complexity. And what that means is problems are complex. And a lot of people come to these simple solutions on the front end. Once they've worked their way through the complexity, they stop. And my experience is you have to work your way through it to get to the far side simplicity, get to a simplicity that's on the other side of complexity. If you're going to execute, and ultimately that's one of the things that great leaders do, is they make sure that execution happens. So to me, that's another thing, is this idea of getting it simple again, making the map simple. Maps are simple. Maps take all the elements of the world and boil them down to the few signposts and guideposts that we need to get to a destination. Great leaders do that really well, but it takes knowing your own values, being trustworthy, and clarifying what winning is, and then executing. So to me, that's kind of the fundamental formula.
Yeah, and I think from my personal experience, at least, when you know something really deeply and intimately, it's kind of easier to convey it in a simple way. And so I think a lot of it is also just really kind of deeply understanding what it is you're trying to convey, and really understanding the mission well. That's really interesting. And
that means you've
Joel,
gone through the complexity. You know, in order to understand it really well, you've wrestled the complexity to the ground, and then you've boiled it again and gotten it simple.
Absolutely. And Joel, you talk about, the importance of building a team. I think one of the most essential things of building, any company. And you use sports quite a bit to drive this concept home. We're going to go ahead and pull up another clip from the video book.
When it comes to finding and managing the perfect team, Peterson returns to football with this advice.
Get the right people on the field. And what that means is you have to have the right folks out there. The same thing is true in a business team. You've got to get the right people on the field. So that means you have to source the right people, you have to interview them properly, you have to onboard them correctly, or to assign them properly, you have to give them feedback, you have to reassign them, and ultimately you have to remove those who can't perform at the level that the team needs. Getting the right team on the field is not a one-time thing that you do. It is an ongoing, forever process to make sure that you've got the best team on the field at all times.
Amy Errett is the founder and CEO of Madison Reed, a hair color company that promotes coloring without harsh ingredients. They employ nearly 700 stylists in 87 salons nationwide. Peterson says Errett is one entrepreneurial leader who has excelled in team building, especially as her business experiences rapid growth.
Our culture is a really strong one, and I have a deep belief that your team members' buy-in to the mission and purpose is absolutely critical to running a company. People come to Madison Reed because they believe in our ingredient story, they believe in the authenticity of the product, and they believe that building a community is something that they want to be part of in a team.
Getting the right team starts with hiring, and Peterson says that sometimes entrepreneurial leaders make common mistakes during that process.
One of them is people hiring themselves. I think it's a tendency that most people have to like people who look like themselves, who went to the same school, the same skill set. We understand that best. One of the ways that you get around that is getting around the second mistake that I see people make, which is not having the team make the hire. You have to have input from everybody. And I think you see different optics. You're able to triangulate on a person. So that's a common thing. Another common mistake people make is making it about the money. That's always a mistake. People work, again, for meaning and for the team that they're working with, as much as for money. If it's about money, they can be hired away for money.
So the first place it starts is having values always syncs up with how do you assess whether a team member will be a good fit, not just for the company, but for them. We have a very extensive interview process, and it's taken us years to cultivate how to find better team members, again, for ourselves and for the team member. I still meet, and I know this is a little bit out there, I still meet every HQ or leader in the field, meaning a store leader or a district manager, regional manager, or area manager. I still do the final interview.
That is very inspiring. There's Madison Reed just down the street from me. Joel, rewatching Amy's story and her building, Madison Reed into the company it is today. You and Amy talk a lot in the video book about the importance of developing EQ, and for yourself and on your team. What are strategies for leaders to kind of build their and expand and grow their own EQ, and instill this into their teams?
Well, I think it starts with your own your own personal development, your own character, your ability to love others, to care about others. EQ starts there. It's not a technique. You have to start with really caring about other people. And you show that by listening to them and by showing them that they matter, and that they can be safe and that you can have conversations where you can have different ideas and you can conflict, but that doesn't mean you don't respect them. I always say that everybody wants to be if you're building a great culture, be part of a winning team, be a respected member of a winning team doing something meaningful. So if you think about that, respect, winning, and meaning are the three things that you're solving for as a leader. And so I think building an EQ around that, I would say that this idea of people mattering, everybody wants to matter. And so you need to make sure that the people on your team know they matter and that you care about them. And I use the word love, makes my students nervous, but I actually use it as a verb, not a noun. You show love. You can love people you don't even like. But I think that's really kind of the underpinning, is really caring about others.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of stories about ways that you've kind of shown people on your team kind of how much they mean to the company?
Well, one of the things I do, so I'm out of the office a lot. I'm off teaching or doing other things, and I really try hard to just stick my nose in the door when I get back in various people randomly, and just say, how are you doing? What are you working on? And how's your family? And what that says is, I care. I want to know. And we have a bunch of interns in for the summer. And I think next week I'm taking all of them out to dinner and getting to know them better. So, I mean, I think it's this things that you don't think moves the ball down the field, but really does, because business is a team sport. Anybody who thinks it's just somebody alone doing it, somebody with a vision creating it, is sorely mistaken. They're unlikely to build an enduring enterprise.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. And I guess one of the things, especially in today's business landscape, with rapid innovation and change happening, especially with AI, how do you think about kind of building agility? How can leaders stay agile and guide their teams through uncertainty and change while maintaining productivity and morale? What advice would you have for that?
Well, I think it's even harder when you superimpose remote work. I think that just adds another dimension. Rapidly changing markets, new entrants into markets. I think the best businesses, so I've been involved in hundreds of businesses, and the best ones I know stay close to the market. They basically say that, oh, we're in business to serve customers. And it's actually more specific than that. Customers have problems. They have pain points. So where is pain? And you should be driven towards pain. So it's kind of being alert to pain points. And then your job is to create a solution that is worth more to your customers than it costs them to buy. So keeping costs down and delivering a lot of value is really your job. And so, and you do that in lots of ways: conversations, reading, watching lit video, books. I mean, anything that brings new information to you is how you stay attuned to the market. Listening is, I think, that I was interviewed by the New York Times one time about my the way that I managed enterprises, and I said something like listening without an agenda. And so people can tell when you have an agenda, but when you don't have an agenda and you're just collecting information, you actually become attuned to a lot of things I just said. So that'd be one idea.
Right. And yeah, I think definitely staying very close to customers and always kind of speaking to them to make sure you're kind of aligning with their pain points. You can never really go wrong by talking to customers too much, right?
Yep. Delighting
And
customers.
so Joel,
Nothing like delighting customers for building a business. So customer delight should be right at the top of the list.
Absolutely. And Joel, so at Stanford, you teach a class about difficult conversations, and what the ones your students remember the most is about firing. And so let's say you didn't get it right, you have to fire someone, or you have to undergo a round of layoffs on the team. How do you keep the rest of the team resilient after something like this happens, and excited and productive?
Yeah, that's one of the things that everybody dreads, and I dread it too. I don't think, in fact, I think it'd be terrible if you ever got to the point that you looked forward to letting people go or shutting down a division or something like that. But it's necessary. It's the housekeeping of an enterprise, and so I think laying the groundwork for that. It just says, we're going to review things and we're going to make changes. We talk some about good leavers, and so people understand that when they leave, there's an honorable and good way to leave, and that we'll all be replaced at some point in time. I tell whenever I install a new CEO in an enterprise, one of the first conversations I have with them is, let's talk about your successor. And it shocks them a little bit, but I always say, we're all going to be replaced, and let's make sure that we do it in the right way. So I think if you talk about it in the abstract ahead of time, and then I think the second thing I do is try to bring people into the tent. So when it's happening, make sure that your C-suite, your executive team, is brought into the tent and understands, and that you set goals. And those goals may, as I said, maybe we lose less this quarter than we did last quarter, but you have clear goals and you reset those and you communicate. You have to communicate lavishly in those kinds of times. And so I think that's one of the ways that you do it. But it'll never be easy. Nobody will ever like it.
I completely agree. It's one of the hardest things, I think, to do. Especially, you build up a relationship with the team over time. It's very challenging. And I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience can empathize with that. In the video book and the book, you talk about the importance of having a clear vision. And how can kind of learning development, talent, HR leaders help leaders across their organization kind of align and execute this vision really effectively? How can those teams kind of help drive clarity across the organization?
Well, one of the things that's developed over my career, two things that have really been important, have been that the director of HR now, they call them CHROs, the Chief Human Resource Officer, are now part of the C-suite. They're considered critical for it. And if you buy into this idea that business is a team sport and you've got to have the right team on the field, they are vital members. So they should understand strategy. They should be part of setting the mission. And I think the whole team should set the mission. And usually that means describing values and then force ranking them and then saying, are we spending our time against our values, our time, money, and mind share? For example, at JetBlue, one of our values was safety. Our top value was safety. And so I would ask, where are we spending money? How are we spending money and time and mind share on safety? And we set up a separate committee. We spent time on it because it was a value and everybody agreed to it. So once everyone agreed to it, it was easy for the Chief Human Resource Officer to test against those values and hire for those values. Another thing I've done is use headhunter firms that and over so that they understand the mission and they start looking for people and hiring people that fit that. And it takes a while to get in their minds that if you just do one-off hires, they don't really participate in that. and your chief human resources officer can help with that. But I think it's, and the second thing I was going to say is that the new thing that I've seen that we didn't have when I first started out are coaches. A lot of CEOs have coaches. It's today's technology. And I think that the CHRO can help find a coach and work with the coach, working with the CEO. It used to be seen as a weakness if you had to have a coach. That meant that something was wrong with you. Today, I think it means something's wrong with you if you don't want a coach.
So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of kind of the companies that we partner with have, executive coaches or executive coaching type software that they're kind of incorporating into learning and development. And, a lot of these companies are not very old, they're a few years old that are doing this. So it's definitely become, very, very popular.
Yeah.
I hope our audience, HR and learning development and leaders got some good tidbits from that. You've had a really diverse and successful career in a lot of different facets. What practices have you personally found most effective in your leadership journey and kind of personal growth and development? And how could others incorporate these into their lives and routines?
Well, we've talked a little bit about thinking through your values, your assets, and your liabilities. I think being really intentional about that is quite helpful. So I would encourage everybody to do that. For me, one of the things that was the most helpful was to think about time management. I remember reading Stephen Covey about the 4 quadrants, using urgent and important as the measures. And what he called quadrant 2 were things that are not urgent, but important, and spending more time on that. And I've found that to be really helpful. Once I'm at peace and feel like I've done that fundamental work on myself, then I'm more effective in all the other quadrants. And then I think the other thing is spend less time on the unimportant and not urgent things. I mean, there's a lot of things we do that are neither either important nor urgent. We waste time watching TV or doing things like that. And so I've cut down on that time, and I've spent more time in the important but not urgent category. One example of that I've told my students and others is that I write a weekend email to all my kids. Well, there's nothing that's urgent about that at all. In fact, it's kind of a pain, but I've got it on my calendar. I don't even have to think about it. Every weekend, I write a short email. It can be something I'm working on. It can be about family tradition. It can be about D-Day or Armistice Day or anything that's happened in history. It can be about anything, but just a touch point every week with my kid. Now, my kids are all married and gone, but it's just reach out every week. Well, that's important, but it's certainly not urgent. So just an example.
That's a perfect segue into your new book. And so in the new book, you talk about how you and Diana were very intentional with how you raise your kids, and your strategy was different from a lot of different metaphors for parenting: tiger, helicopter, and dolphin parenting. Could you tell us a little bit about how you and Diana successfully raised 7 kids and some of the stats? 5 Stanford undergrads, 3 Harvard MBAs, and countless other accolades.
Well, you mentioned those labels, and that is not what we were solving for. I think I first have to start out and say that we were, or at least I, was relatively unsuccessful at first. I found myself overburdened, putting off family things. I felt outgunned, outmanned, and impatient with my kids. And finally, I decided that a lot of these things that I've observed with CEOs, I could apply to the family. So I became intentional. I said, what are we solving for? And I realized that we're not solving for the kinds of things that you described. We're really solving for maturity, happiness, productivity, grit. And the way I put it was, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. We're raising productive adults. So we actually divided what maturity meant into 6 categories. And then we said, okay, now how do we operationalize each of these categories? And without sharing anything with our kids, we came up with ways to help them develop intellectual maturity, physical maturity, emotional maturity, et cetera, et cetera. So we were quite intentional about it. I think it creeps people out to think about how intentional we were, but it was quite seamless. Once we thought it through and decided what we were going to do, it was actually kind of easy to execute on it.
It's really interesting. And when, if you're able to share, when does the book come out?
I think we're shooting for November 12th. So we'll see if we hit that, but that's our objective. That's our mission. That's our goal.
Amazing. And I'm sure our audience is very much looking forward to reading this new book, hopefully by the end of this year. And Joel, thanks so much for taking the time to share, your experience and leadership advice with us, and giving us a peek into your new book. We're going to go ahead and hop into QA and answer some of the questions from the audience now. So it seems like we have a lot of questions in here. So one of the questions, I'm a young manager who doesn't have a ton of guidance or a mentor. How do you recommend I go about finding someone who I can lean on to make hard decisions?
Say the last part of that again, Ronnie.
How do you recommend I go finding someone who I can lean on to make hard decisions?
So if you're the young manager you're talking about. So I think what I believe is having a mentor is an incredible gift, but you can't go out and ask somebody to be your mentor. It's a very hard thing to do. People are busy and they have a lot. So it's kind of what's in it for them. So it's almost a natural thing. It's like falling in love. You'll find that there are some older people who will take you under their wing. They may be older or not, but that will take you under their wing. That you almost have to let that natural thing happen. If it doesn't happen, if you're not fortunate enough to find one of those, you can make mentors out of a lot of people. For me, Winston Churchill was a mentor. I obviously never met him, and I don't put myself on a scale with him at all, but how he handled incredible pressure. In fact, if you were to see my desk today, you'd see there's a picture of Winston Churchill looking down on me, glowering, when the photographer Yusuf Karsh snatched the cigar from him and snapped the most iconic picture of World War II. Well, I've read most of the Churchill biographies. He's been a mentor, and whenever I've felt burdened, unable to go forward, go on, felt like, oh my gosh, this is too much, I look up at that picture, Winston Churchill, and remember what he did in the darkest days, September, October 1940, and I say, okay, I can do this. So there's access to mentors for all of us, but reading is a fabulous way to locate a mentor if you don't have a natural one.
That's right. And outside of the Churchill biographies, what are some of your kind of favorite books that you go back to every now and then, or just kind of really enjoy diving into?
So I read a book a week because my kids got me walking 10,000 steps a day. So when I say read, I listen to a book a week that way. And so it's hard to remember. The recent ones I'm reading is one called Crucial Conversations. And it's really, you asked about EQ. I think it's one of the ways that if you have to fire somebody, or if you want to get close to somebody or influence them or do whatever, the ideas behind this book, Crucial Conversations, is important. There's one that I read many, many years ago, and it's quite anachronistic. In other words, I don't think modern audiences would like it, but it's one called The Will to Manage by Marvin Bower. It's really a classic. Marvin Bower was one of the original or early Jones Day lawyers, and he was the founder of McKinsey. Was managing partner of McKinsey for many, many years. And he writes about what I adapted, what I call VOSTC, which is values, objectives, strategy, tactics, and controls, and their alignment. He uses different words for it and different examples, but the power of alignment has always, I think it's really influenced my life and my management style as much as anything. So those are a couple.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of the second book, so I'm gonna check that one out. And I am also a huge audiobook listener. And I recently listened to Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara, who became kind of the lead of 11 Madison Park when it was rated, the #1 restaurant in the world. And it just shares his story about how he started off, as, just like somebody working in a restaurant and grew into kind of the leader of the best restaurant in the world, and how, unreasonable hospitality is something that can be applied to so many different parts of life and business. And so, I found that one really interesting recently.
I'll get that one and read it. Thank you for that recommendation. I'm always on the prowl for recommendations. That triggers a thought in me. One of the things we did differently at JetBlue was the idea of our customers were our guests. And so we had our flight attendants take hospitality training, and and it was part of our brand. We tended to treat people like our guests, whereas other airlines treated them as cattle, not mentioning any names. But so
I think we all know and have had those experiences on JetBlue versus other airlines. So, yeah, and a few other questions here from the audience. So, is there anything? So you seem to work with a lot of students at the university level. Is there anything you're excited about when it comes to the younger and future workforce, and kind of how has your maybe advice changed over time now that AI is becoming more and more popular? There's all this fear that AI is going to displace many jobs. How has your kind of guidance to students, at Stanford changed, and what kind of advice do you provide to them?
Well, I still go back to fun. I'm a dinosaur. I'm old school, and my students would tell you that, but there's something fundamental about these sort of principles, these unchanging principles. And a lot of the work we have to do, Stanford has a motto: change lives, change organizations, change the world. And I quiz my students about that and say, it all starts with changing yourself, figuring out your natural trajectory in life, and then modifying it. What are the things you need to change? And so I'm more fundamental. You ask about AI. I had a funny experience with it, and a student did his homework on AI, and he read it to me, and I said, I'm no longer worried about AI, because it doesn't yet do all the things that you think it'll do. I think it's an important skill set to get good at, but I don't think it will ever really replace what you need to have in order to be analytical. And not only analytical, but I think being synthesizing. I think that's one of the great things that humans do. Experienced, wise humans are able to bring things together. We value analysis when we're going through school. We value synthesis when we're leading other people. And I don't think that really comes about with great wisdom without the self-reflection, the self-improvement that I've tended to promote.
That's really interesting. And two more questions for you, Joel. What is, across the many companies and leaders that you advise, what is the biggest challenge that you see leaders facing today, in your opinion?
Well, there's so many. I mean, some of them really have a hard time building a highly productive, interdependent culture, where people have the same language, the same objectives. A lot of people are kind of self-referencing today. There's something that's gone on with the social media, where people are coarser. They're more willing to create outrage and use language on each other that is really insensitive. And I think living in that environment, I think is a challenge for leaders. So I think getting their arms around the culture, getting a common language, common objectives, I think that's a challenge for most leaders. And the remoteness of the workforce actually adds another dimension to that. So I think that's a very common problem. And then I think the other one is that people tend to be really emotional. And I think getting your emotions under control, again, it was my second mantra: I am not my emotions. This idea that stimulus and response are separated by our decisions. Read Viktor Frankl, if you want to appreciate the value of free will. And I think separating stimulus from response and building our emotional strength is a really important thing. And I think people have to step back and think through things really hard. Count to 10. And if that's not enough, count to 10 again before they act.
That's right. I think a lot of Ryan Holiday's work is really about that too, kind of having a stoic attitude when it comes to decision making.
Yeah.
Another question. So, any it's one of the questions is sometimes we learn best from hearing when other people made mistakes, but oftentimes people are not comfortable sharing when they made a mistake. So, a question to you: were there any mistakes you made in your career that you feel comfortable sharing with the audience?
Yeah, I'm an open book. I actually think we learn more from our mistakes than from our successes. So I think they're really powerful. And I think one of the most important things we learn from that is to embrace the mistake, to say, they're kind of antigens going forward. They inoculate us against depression and other things that can happen when you have a failure. So embrace the failure, learn to say, what can I learn from this? But I've made all kinds of mistakes. The one that I think has been the most far-reaching in my life is my very first job. I ended up getting fired and ultimately sued and spending 3 years in the courts on it because I think I wasn't sensitive enough to what other people were thinking and wanting. I think in the end, I was pushing for what I'm still convinced today was the right thing to do, but I wasn't as sensitive as I needed to be to other people's viewpoints. So I ended up getting fired and sued and needing to start over.
Wow. I'm sure there's that was a really crazy journey for your first job.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, it was 19 years into my career and I'd had a lot of success. I'd been the CFO and the CEO of the company. And it was just something that people wanted to do that I felt was unethical and I couldn't do it. And I didn't manage that really well. I think I would manage it much, much better today. But it was a big mistake. How I handled it was a big mistake.
Well, thanks again, Joel, for sharing that with us and for everything today. It has been a pleasure to speak with you. Just a few couple last items here before we go. So for the audience, if you haven't done so yet, check your registration confirmation email where you will get complimentary access to the Entrepreneurial Leadership video book. And make sure to check out our LinkedIn page for our upcoming Fireside Chats. So next month, we will be hosting Marshall Goldsmith, the best-selling author of What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And finally, if you're interested in learning how Lit for Teams can ignite engagement and drive, microlearning at your organization, you and your learning development and HR team can trial Lit for free. So just go to our website, like Lit for Teams, and you can submit your information to learn more. Finally, just to wrap up, I hope everyone has a great end of the week. And Joel, thanks again for joining us here today.
Thanks, Ronak. Enjoyed it.